In this video, we're gonna go through a complete beginner's tutorial on Lightburn, which is the most popular software to control lasers like this. Hey, I'm Brandon and I run the Make or Break Shop channel. I do a lot of laser reviews, as well as talking about how you can get the most out of your laser, and how you use your software is going to be a key element of that. Now, when people ask me about Lightburn specifically, they tell me it's a little bit of a mystery, especially if you've never come from any type of laser software before. So the way I want to approach this tutorial is like a murder mystery where we're going to be a detective to figure out the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why, all having to do with Lightburn and this machine. So to start off, let's talk about the what and the what is Lightburn. Specifically, what version of Lightburn do you need to get? I'm over on Lightburn's website and you can download the trial, which is great. Now this is paid software, so you do want to make sure you're buying the right version of it. This works on Mac as well as Windows. I'm going to be recording this on my Mac. All right, so I'm over here on Lightburn and we're actually going to download the trial. I think they give you like a 30-day free trial, which is great. But within the software, there's going to be a few different licenses that you can unlock for different types of lasers. So this will be all laser specific. We're going to go ahead and download the trial. So it's basically two different versions. You got your standard core license, which is going to be for all types of machines that are going to be like this. So when we're talking about like diode lasers, whether they're open gantry or enclosed machines like this Creality Falcon 2 Pro, are going to be using a controller that utilizes G-code. So you'll actually see them call out the G-code when you come over to the core license. So this is the ones you need to get to start out, which is $100. But if you have a larger machine, you actually need to get the Pro license, which is $199. This is going to be for machines if you have a DSP controller, which you normally are going to find on the higher end like CO2 machines. So like the Thunderbolt or the Aeon line or a lot of the OhmTech units or even higher from there are going to utilize that. And a lot of times they're actually going to look something like this. There'll be a physical control on the machine. And last but not least, this is something they've added in somewhat recently, is the support for Galvo fiber machines or lasers that look a little bit more like this. But if you're on this tutorial specifically, we're going to be looking at a diode machine. So the core license is all you need to get. So coming back to who, we now know if we need core or pro, but now specifically, let's talk about who the machine is going to be, AKA how are we going to connect this to the software. So again, we are using a G-code based machine, this Creality 2 Pro. I think this is the 60-watt version. I've actually just installed like a clean version of Lightburn, so this should be what yours looks like when you install it. Since I don't have a machine connected, it's going to open up this device menu right here. And don't get thrown off by all of these panels. We'll get into what all of this is here in a minute. But to connect your machine, I'm on an older MacBook Pro, like an M1 version, but specifically it's a USB-C connection. And so a lot of times these machines are going to come with a USB cable, on a USB-C cable on one end, but a USB-A cable on the other. So you'll have to wind up using some type of adapter. And I found that a lot of times the combination of cable and adapter, something might be off. So if this isn't connecting for whatever reason, definitely try like a few different versions of cables and specifically adapters if you need to. Then I'm plugging it into the port on the side of my machine. Now you can do a couple of things. One is you can do Find My Laser. I actually find more often than not with these G-code style machines, it actually doesn't find the laser. When it does the DSP controllers, it normally always does it. So I don't know if it's like a G-code specific thing, but you can also just create it manually, which is what we are going to do. So I hit that. Now it's going to ask what type of controller are you using? Again, Gerbil, GRBL. I'm selecting this one right here, hitting next. We're going to be going through the serial USB port. I'm not using Ethernet to connect. Then go ahead and name it. This is the Creality Falcon 2 Pro. And in terms of the X and the Y axis, this is like the work area of the machine itself. The manufacturer should tell you all of this. And so in my case, this is a 400 by 400 machine. I'm gonna go ahead and hit next. Then it's going to ask where is the origin of your laser, meaning where is your laser going to home when it goes through its like initial operation. And again, this is something you can find like directly from the manufacturer, and a lot of them will provide you like a tutorial on how to get your machine set up, but usually it's going to be either front left or back right. In this case, this is front left on this machine, and I've got auto home your laser on startup. That always gives you a really good 0, 0 position. And if you don't know what that means, we will cover it here in a minute. All right, I'm going to hit next. Then everything is good to go. And I'm going to hit finish. And I'm going to hit OK. All right. So we have the machine set up, but we actually don't have it connected. And you can tell that, by coming over here to this move panel right here. And if I click on console, this is gonna be like a readout of the commands that are getting sent to the machine. This is also a really easy spot to see, like, is this machine connected? And it's not. So what we need to do is actually tell the machine how we've connected to the computer. To do that, come on down here to the laser menu. And if yours looks a little bit different, like all of these menus, especially that have an X on it, if you click like the normal menu part, you can kind of click and move this around. But this should be like the default setup. And actually, let me double check that I do have this set to default. Yes, okay, so now it is on default. I might have had a couple other things up there before that I can show you guys later. But down here, we actually have our connection settings. We have our Creality Falcon 2 Pro set up, but this is where we need to take a look, because what you need to look for is actually the incoming port that the machine is connected to. Mine isn't connected, and what that usually means is I need to turn the machine off. I'm gonna go ahead and close Lightburn. I'm gonna turn the machine back on. I'm going to reopen Lightburn. And after doing that, you can see now I have this USB modem port. If I click that, now it's going to automatically home to that front left position. And that means that we now have connected to the machine. A lot of times if things are being finicky, I find that just by like restarting the program, turning the machine on and off, or even using like a different USB port winds up getting it connected. And always make sure you are not on the debug or the Bluetooth incoming port. Make sure you have a port that has a name on it. And this is going to be a little bit different on Windows, but for Mac, this is how it's going to work. Then one thing I like to do right off the bat, just to make sure I do actually have a connection, is come up here to the move menu. So for these panels, especially on the right side, this top and the bottom, you can have different versions of it. And so you have a cuts and a layers panel, a move panel, and a console. Again, if I click to the console, you can now see that we are connected, everything is homed, and this now says ready. But I wanna make sure I have control of the machine, so I'm gonna hit move, and this right here is your jog panel. So you can move the laser head around. So I'm gonna hit this right arrow right here. You're gonna see it moves to the right. I'm gonna move it back. And I wind up using this a lot just to make sure I have things connected. And you can adjust how this is moving. So that's what all of these settings are right here. This is in millimeters, so I could like adjust this to 10 if I wanted this to be more fine. You can see that is moving, but specifically the speed may be something that you really want to increase. A lot of times the defaults are really low. I believe the max on this machine is around like 24,000 millimeters per minute, which is the units I have set up right here. So that's just what I have this set up to. And I don't have a motorized Z-axis, meaning when I focus this, I have to move this up and down with a little switch on the side. But if your machine supports that, this is where you could adjust that speed as well. And that is where you have the Z-axis controls. And the last portion of the Who section is just gonna have to do with some general settings. So first, settings about who Lightburn actually is, and then settings about who the machine is, or like how you can adjust machine settings. So you've got these two menus here at the top. The gear one is going to be general Lightburn settings. Then like the wrench is going to be your device settings. So under our general general settings, the only main one that I wind up adjusting a good bit is going to be the type of units that I'm using. And they do a good job of telling you basically everything in minutes is going to be better for diodes because most of the time your diode machines are going to be a good bit slower than your higher end CO2, and then especially your galvo machines. So you can adjust the units accordingly. This is only going to affect things in the software, not on the machine itself. But for this tutorial, we're going to keep everything in millimeters per minute. There's some other settings in here. You can do the beginner mode, which is going to give you a simpler interface. So let me turn that on. Yeah, so it's going to clean up a good bit of the stuff, but I want to keep all of that on. And then we have our device specific laser settings, and we pretty much aren't going to adjust anything in here. If you do need to adjust your work area, you can do that right here. And then also if you want to enable the Z axis, you can do this from here as well. But one thing that is going to be specific to diode machines that we are going to do that normally isn't ever turned on right off the bat is enable the laser fire button. So that's this guy right here. And then I also want to laser on when framing. And I'm gonna set this, I think the max you can do is 20? Yeah, 20 is gonna be the max. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this at like 10 because I have a 60 watt laser on here. So that's actually pretty high. I'm gonna keep it to 5. And what that is going to do is it gives us this fire button right here. And if I shut this window, I'm gonna move this back some. All right, if I hit fire, so that's me actually turning on the laser beam. And that's helpful because you can actually see where your laser is going to fire. Because on a diode machine, unlike a CO2 machine, which has like a little red laser pointer basically, shooting the same spot where the beam is gonna go, the CO2 machines are clear. You can't actually see where the beam is gonna go, so you have to align like the little red laser dot. This one, you can use the beam itself just in a low power mode, but for safety reasons, they usually have that turned off. But in a minute, this is really helpful when you're trying to frame around your artwork to make sure everything is aligned. And again, that is what that laser on when framing in that percentage, that's what that is for, which you'll see here in a sec. All right, now let's talk about the what. What are you going to engrave or cut out on your artwork? Now, in this case, I have a piece of 3mm birch plywood in there that we're gonna be using as an example, but let's talk about what we're going to put on it. There's a few different ways you can do it. Basically, you can create artwork directly inside of Lightburn, and you can also import artwork directly into Lightburn as well. To create it, we're gonna be using this menu over here on the left. This is gonna have the majority of your like creation tools. So you've got like rectangles, and if you hold Shift, at least on a Mac, that's gonna make it square. We'll go ahead and delete that. Circle, so on and so forth. But then text is probably gonna be the one that you wind up using the most. So I'm gonna do the text and I'm gonna hit test. And like with most editing software, you're gonna have a bunch of different options when you're editing different elements. So specifically with test, if we come up here to the top, we look at this menu, you have your position. So that is your X and your Y and your width and your height. And so you can adjust this, lock it and unlock it. And then one thing that you're gonna see a lot more when we're talking about positioning is when you're scaling this. So let's say we want to scale this to like 100. I just hit this to the middle. And so it's gonna scale from the center versus if I hit Control Z or Command Z, and I do that again, and I scroll it, and I do it from the bottom left, you can see that is basically like your pivot point when you're doing all of this. I normally try to keep it all in the middle as needed. And then over here, you're going to have your font menu where obviously you can adjust your font. Now, one thing that's gonna be a little bit different dealing with text is, so let's say your text overlaps. Let me find some text that actually does overlap. So like script text, this happens a lot. The default should be that this setting right here, welded, is turned on. And what that means, if I zoom in, if I have this turned off, you can see we have those like different connection points between the letters between the E and the S and the T. So you always want to have that turned on. Not only will that make your engraves faster, but especially if you're cutting that out, it's going to follow the lines. So if this wasn't welded together, you would actually have some lines right here that are cut. For whatever reason, if that setting is turned off, make sure you've got that turned on so that everything is like welded together so they come out as one piece, because that's probably the way that you want it. A couple other things as we are now putting artwork on here. I am just going to actually copy and paste this so I can have a bunch of different ones. The selection and the way you can select different things inside of Lightburn, they give you a few different ways. First is you obviously can just like select something and move it around. But with like most things, you can click and drag. But with Lightburn, it's a little bit unique. You can either click and drag to the right, or you can click and drag to the left. And when I do that, you can see that I either have a green box or a red box. Now, the only things you're going to select if you have the red box, so if you're dragging to the right, are things you fully like enclose within that box. So you can see I've got that bottom right test not fully inside the box. If I let it go, it's only going to select those three. So that can be actually really handy if you're trying to like sort through a bunch of different things. But if you do it the other direction, so I'm dragging to the left, anything that this touches is going to be selected. So that might be confusing when you first get into it, but that's just the way it works in general. And since we got a few things in here as well, let's talk about grouping really quick. We're gonna talk about layers here in a minute, and you're gonna think about layers a lot different than you would in a program like Photoshop, or things are like layered on top of each other. Typically, you're gonna use lasers to have specific laser settings. So feeds and speeds, as well as like fill settings, will be within a single layer, but you can still group things within a single layer. So actually right now, since everything is showing up as black, I've got my layers turned on, but the Mac screen is cutting them out a little bit, but you can see they are labeled down at the bottom. Those are all of the different layers that you have access to, but I can group these as needed. So let's say I want all of these to be grouped together. You can select everything, you can right click, you can hit group, which is really handy, especially if you're trying to move things around quickly. So let's say I have a bunch of these and all of these, and I'm going to do the green select. I want to group these. So then if I just want to select and move things around, but you guys know how grouping works more than likely. But the big one outside of grouping is alignment. Now this is something you definitely will use a good bit. So I'm going to delete all of this. I'm going to add in a circle. And for a lot of these, there's like keyboard shortcuts. So this one looks like it's Control or Command E to do a circle. So I'm going to hold Shift down. I'm going to drag it. And then let's say I want to put put some text inside of that. So test again. I'm going to flip this font back to one of the ones we were using initially, test. Now let's say I want to put this test directly in the middle of this circle. There's some snapping settings you can use inside of Lightburn, but really the best way to do it is just to select everything, and then you can use your alignment controls up here. So at the top right, you can see you have several different ways to align. Again, this is going to be really similar to other software you've probably used in the past. So for this, I want to put this directly in the middle, which they actually give you a little crosshairs to do this, because this will probably be something you do a lot inside of laser software, and it adjusts it just a little bit, and now we are good to go. Now, we're not going to go super deep into all of these different tools, but you can definitely create your own custom graphics as needed. One tool I do want to mention is, let's say you've got a couple things in here, so a couple circles, and maybe you want to figure out like a specific distance within them for whatever you are creating. They do have a ruler tool. So you can see when I select this, I'm going to get this measurement window. And then I can actually select different elements, and it's going to give me different characteristics about that element. So that's really good if you need to like do a fine inspection about some type of dimension because you need it to be exact to whatever you're going to create. All right, and the last way to add artwork is to import artwork directly into the software. And there's two basic versions, things that you can import. One is going to be vector files, meaning files that have like the math where it knows the shape so that you can actually readjust the shape when you bring it in. Basically, everything we were just creating was a vector file. So most common are going to be like SVG files or .eps files. And I actually have an SVG right here of a big Aztec calendar that I like to engrave from Star Wars. And SVGs can get a little bit hard because a lot of times they are built differently, meaning they might be grouped in different levels of grouping. So like if you want to edit it, a lot of times you have to like ungroup the SVG to be able to get into the details. So this one's actually pretty complicated, so it's a pretty good example to do it. So I am going to select it, see everything's selected. I'm going to hit ungroup. And I believe at this point, yeah, everything is ungrouped. And now with that ungrouped, I can actually go in and move the individual vectors. And you can go into even more fine details with some of these other vector editing tools. Specifically this one, you can edit the nodes. So you can go in and actually individually adjust all of the nodes and the lines that make up your shapes if you need to. But most of the times when you import stuff in, you really aren't gonna have to do that, but just know you can have those full controls if you need them. Now the other way to bring in, and I'm actually going to group this whole thing, and I'm going to bring in the shape again, but this time I'm actually bringing it in as a PNG. So you can see this is actually a shape. I just took a screenshot on the Mac to bring it in, and then I'm going to scale it down. So you can see there is white space around it. That's usually the quickest way you can tell if you have a PNG or if you have a vector. So this would just be a direct image. And the image is going to be different just in the way that you actually can engrave it with your machine. So you can't cut an image, you have to have a vector to do that. And we're going to talk about the different cut and engrave settings in this next section. How are we going to translate our artwork into something that the laser can do? So now we're going to get into our cut settings that typically are going to be within different layers. So to do that, I'm actually going to place this on a different layer. So right now I have this selected. I am going to come down here with it selected and hit blue. And when I do that, you can see that the blue outline of this image has changed. You'll be able to see this a lot easier when you do it with a vector image. So I'm going to put this on the red layer, and then that entire vector turns red. And as I'm doing that, it's actually going to add these layers to this cut and layer menu. So if I go in and change this to, let's say, green, or the third layer, you can see that adjust. And then right here, you can see the difference between the two in terms of the mode that the laser is going to be in when it actually does the laser stuff. So our blue one layer, this is an image, and we'll get into some of the image settings here in a second. But our green layer, again, is our line layer. And since those are vectors, you're gonna get a few different options with your vectors. First is going to be a individual line, meaning when you send this to the laser is going to follow all of these different shapes and basically trace the outline of them. So to show you what that looks like, I'm actually gonna turn this layer off. So within the cut and the layer settings, you have the ability to turn off whether it is visually shown. So this is inside of the software. So this one, I'm gonna turn this off. But then also you have the ability to turn off the output. So even if you have it turned off, it would still send it to the laser. So in this case, we're gonna do a preview here in a second, which will preview what the laser is gonna do. So I'm gonna turn that off as well. And so I'm gonna hit, and I'm actually gonna move this over a little bit, and I'm gonna hit this computer icon, which is gonna give me a preview of what the laser is going to do. This is really handy because, again, it gives you a preview, but you can actually watch it happen live or slower than that. But as you can see, let me slow it down, it is just tracing the outline of the image. So it is creating a bunch of different lines for your vector. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. So that is something, again, you can only do with a vector. You can't do that with an image. But let's say instead of it tracing the lines, we wanna use those lines as like boundaries to our shape, meaning we want everything filled in. So to do that, you can hit fill. I'm gonna turn fill on. It's visually not gonna look any different, but if we come over here to our preview, now you can see, if I scroll over it, that it's gonna go back and forth. And this is gonna be a really similar process to what it's gonna do with an image as well. All of the red in there is actually moves of the laser where it's not firing. And it also tells you that down here at the bottom. I actually find if I have a vector as well as a bitmap to do that image, doing the vector is typically going to be better because a lot of times the way it does like the math and the calculations can go faster, but you could actually do two different operations. So you could do like the normal engrave, but then you could do a really light pass at the end that just does the outline that I find gives you a really like crisp edge to a lot of your graphics. So that's really handy if you have that vector. But if you don't, let's turn this off. And now let's turn our image back on. You're gonna have a few other different settings. Scoot this over a little bit. So again, I'm gonna hit this, and it's pretty much gonna look exactly the same because it's doing pretty much the same process. But while it looks the same here, the math behind what the laser is doing is a good bit different than a vector. With a vector, it knows either the laser needs to be on or off. And this one is kind of hard to tell because we really only have two colors, so a white or a black. I'll show you like a grayscale image here in a second, because there's actually different ways that you can process your image. So not only your speed and your power, which are the main settings that you have when you're talking about the laser, but then you can also adjust your DPI or like your resolution or the dots per inch, because what it's doing is it's converting your image into a bunch of tiny little dots, and then it's firing those lasers and those dots to recreate your image. So like on the computer screen, this is like your individual pixels, more or less. There's a few different image modes. We're really not gonna get into them, but know for a diode laser, most of the times I find that Jarvis does the best. But as always, I encourage you guys to test these methods out to find what's gonna work the best for what you're working on. And then one setting I do find is very helpful with doing images like this is overscanning, meaning that the laser head is gonna move past the artwork and then speed back up so that when the laser is firing, it's at the full speed. Because if not, you might find that the edges aren't at the same like quality as what's on the interior. Especially it might be a little bit lighter on the edges or a little bit fuzzier. So by turning on that overscan and playing around with like the percentage of how long it needs to slow down and speed up can help with your image. Oh, and something I just did right there that I probably didn't mention already is to get to those layer settings, you just double click on the layer, then you have access to all of these settings. And then once you're inside of this cut settings editor, you can actually bounce around to your different layers, either with your arrows or just by clicking up and down on them. Now to show the image processing a lot better, let's look at something that isn't just straight black or white, so like a vector image. So in this case, this was a full color image of the Mandalorian and his helmet, which it has turned into a grayscale. But when you bring it in, it automatically converts it to a grayscale image. And then again, you can come in here and you can adjust it as needed. But one thing you can do with images that you can't do really with vectors is if you right click it, you can come over here and you can adjust the image. So this is really handy, but also really dependent on the material and the laser that you're doing. But you can do stuff like adjust, like bump the contrast. I'm gonna drop the DPI down because this is going pretty slow. And you can make some image adjustments as needed so that your final result is going to be a little bit nicer. Typically with images, more contrast is usually better so that it actually shows up with your material. But I plan to do a full image tutorial specifically for Lightburn to help you kind of dial in to get a really good result. All right, now let's talk about when. When are things going to happen? Specifically, what is the order that you are going to engrave and cut things out? Now, a lot of times you are just engraving something something, and that's just gonna be on a single layer. So you really don't have to worry about when it's gonna happen because it's just gonna happen when you hit the start button. But if you are cutting something out specifically, typically you're gonna wanna do that at the very end of everything that you are engraving, because especially if you're cutting it out from like a bigger piece of material, a lot of times when you cut a smaller piece out, the overall material might shift. Like if you're dealing with wood, there might be tension inside the wood. Once it's like removed, things can kind of shift around. So it's always a good bet to do all of your engraving first and then do your cutting second. So that is what I have set up right here. So I have a circle that we are going to cut out. I'm using a 60 watt laser beam. So I'm using settings of 600 on my speed, millimeters per minute, and then 50% on my power. And then for the engraving, I'm bumping that up to like 10,000 millimeters per minute. One good thing about Lightburn as well is you can turn on and turn off your air. So I've got, let's see if it's in the camera, but there is a air compressor right here, and that is plugged directly into the machine. Sometimes with these diode machines, that's gonna be completely separate. So you can turn it off and on just yourself, but you do have that ability to do it inside of Lightburn as well. A lot of times with engraves, you're gonna get a nicer engrave if you don't have the air assist on. So I'm actually gonna turn it off right there. You can see you've got that toggle next to the output and the show. But the big thing is basically the order of these layers is the order that things are gonna happen, going from the top down. So having our black layer at the top would actually mean we do our cut first, which is what we don't wanna do. So I'm just gonna hit this button right here. I'm gonna drop it down. So now we're gonna do our engrave first, and then we're gonna do our cut. And as always, you can preview everything by coming up to our little computer, hitting play. You can see it does our engrave, and then it does our cut. This is also good too. It's gonna give you like a readout on the amount of time things are gonna take. So I find this is really helpful if I'm playing around with stuff to see like what's still gonna get me the final result, but do it as fast as possible. This is how you can figure that out. So the when section is literally just the order of when the layers are going to happen. All right, so for our final question as a detective, where is this gonna happen on our material? Outside of getting the machine connected, this is probably the second most common question and problem that I see people having. It's definitely something I've had a lot over the years, because you would think it wouldn't be as hard, especially because I don't have the camera, which this machine does have, connected to this machine. So I'm not getting like a camera readout of what's going on. So I want to have this little test and circle cut out, but there might be a really specific spot on this material I want it to happen. And so you can kind of get to that a few different ways. And that is going to happen from our laser menu down here at the bottom. You can see we have a start from position, and you have a few different options. You've got current position, user origin, and absolute. I typically will do either current position or absolute. So the user origin, you can set a origin point, and then everything is gonna be referenced off of that point. But for this video, we're not gonna worry about that. The absolute is probably the easiest to understand because the artboard basically is the work area. So right down here at the bottom is our 0, 0 position. So that would be our far left corner. And it's also kind of handy because you're usually gonna get like a live readout of where the laser head is. So you can see this crosshair right here is where our laser head is. And I believe, and one kind of fun tool that you have over here on this panel that isn't a art creation tool, but really a movement tool, is your set laser position. So this little like nav thing on a map. You can click that and then select anywhere in the artboard. So I'm gonna do down here, and the actual laser head is going to remove as a result. And so now we have our crosshair moved. So let's say we wanna see where this position is for our artwork. You can see it's gonna be right there. So that's a really quick way to move things around. Again, also if you do the jog, which now is moving, you can also see it's moving inside the software. But the easiest way to see where something is going to be is to do the framing operation. This is something I pretty much always do right before I fire my laser. So coming down to the laser menu, I'm gonna hit frame, and I'm gonna do the square one right here. And when I do that, well, the first is going to want to make sure that I Decided to wait for the fans to turn off, but you could see when I was hitting that frame button, it was doing that framing operation. You can do the same thing with this circle frame as well, which really is a boundary frame. So it's gonna go around the shape of whatever you're trying to frame. So in this case, it would be a circle. Typically, I find that the square one does a good job. And then one thing you can do, and that was a setting that we turned on at the very beginning, is laser on when framing. And to do it, normally you have to hold shift. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then I'm gonna hit the frame button with shift held down. And that's gonna give you that's gonna do a really good job of, and that's gonna do a great job of showing you exactly where the laser is going to fire, or the area it's gonna fire in. Now the second most common one is going to be not absolute coordinates, but current position. This one actually wind up using a ton. So let's say I move the laser to a position that I want. Maybe I want it like up here for whatever reason. And maybe that's the exact center of where I want the artwork. I can make that basically my origin point regardless of where I have this on the artboard. So let's say maybe I move this down here for whatever reason. If I switch this over to current position, now the current position of the laser is gonna be that green dot right there, and then it's gonna do a square around it if I hit the frame button because of the job origin. But if I just wanted that to be in the center, I could do the same as well. And now you can see that that green dot has moved to the center. So if I shut this, because it's gonna wanna run, I'm gonna hold shift and hit frame. You can see it framed from right up there. So current position and absolute coordinates are what I wind up using the most. There are definitely a ton of other options where you can have user set origins. You can have those pre-saved, especially if you're running like jigs and you have setups that you're running over and over again. But those two are the ones I wind up using the most. And honestly, the current position is probably the one that I always do. We're actually gonna go ahead and run this. So again, this is going to do our fill engrave, and then we are going to do our cut out of this 3mm birch piece of plywood. To show you our laser menu right here. So to actually run our operation, all you have to do is hit start. Again, we have output turned on for both of these, so both of these will actually run. It's gonna give you a readout of the time. And then you also have the ability to pause as well as stop the laser as needed. All right, now let's move on to our second operation, and the air assist should be on. I might have turned it down over there. All right, we're gonna go ahead and pull this out. And yeah, it looks like we had pretty good settings, and we are good to go. I had the air assist turned down on the machine itself. That's why I got some of those char marks. But that's a good example of why you always want to use air assist to give you the cleanest cuts possible. Now, if you want to go even deeper into Lightburn, I actually have a full course that walks you step by step through a bunch of different projects, as well as shows off a bunch of really nice features inside of Lightburn that I didn't have time to cover in this video. If you want to check that out, there is a link down below. If you have other questions about Lightburn, other tutorials you'd like to see, let me know, and I'll be sure and make a tutorial for you for the future. All right, until next time, go make or break something in your shop. See you guys.